Hello and welcome to another edition of Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham, where Team Needham discusses everything healthcare. I'm your host, Shawn Needham, and my wonderful wife, Janet, will be joining us shortly. We are streaming live from the Moses Lake Professional Pharmacy podcast studio, and we were super excited to have Tim Karan on our podcast today to talk about strength training. But he had a medical emergency. Everything's okay with his daughter, and he is going to reschedule. So Janet and I actually are going to cover strength training. We've talked about strength training a lot in our podcast, the importance of it. It's if you were going to decide to do one kind of exercise, whether it be cardio or strength training, I would definitely pick strength training over cardio. Now, I'm a mountain bike racer, and Janet is a bike rider also, and we do plenty of cardio riding our mountain bikes, but we also do strength training. And if I was going to pick, if you only had a chance to do one, I would pick strength training. First of all, the reason why is because sarcopenia, which literally means loss of flesh. Osteopenia means loss of bone. Sarcopenia means loss of flesh. And as we age, it is much harder to build muscle mass. And muscle is good for so many things, just not only to help our metabolism, but to help our structure, to help us stay strong. Strength is so important. We're talking with Connie Nightingale a few weeks ago about how important strength is, and not just as we age, but all the time. So, Janet, welcome. And so Tim could not make it on the show, Janet. So we are going to discuss strength training today. Another thing about resistance training, strength training, it is one of the exercises that does, speaking of bones, does increase bone density. Mm-hmm. Whereas there are some exercises that don't. You need bone weight-bearing exercises to increase bone density. Biking is not one of them. Swimming is not one of them. Now, running is. Strength training is probably even more important, in my opinion. And Janet, you go about strength training.
Oh, yes. So one of my biggest pet peeves about wellness and prevention is that rather than prescribe a well-known safe way of rebuilding and maintaining good bone, is that we prescribe drugs for something that naturally can occur if we're doing the right things. And resistance training and strength training for women as well as men is super important as we age, because our bones are the biggest, or the most bone structure that we build is in our early years, our 20s and 30s, and then after that it starts to decline. So if we aren't proactive, which most of us are in our society, unfortunately, because we have more desk jobs than we used to, we don't use the resistance of weight to help us rebuild those bones. And so it doesn't have to be like my 20-year-olds, our boys that go to the gym and, bulk up. Deadlift, right?
500
No, it
pounds.
does not have to be that. It can be very, very simple. And like Shawn was talking about, as far as exercises, even walking is a weight-bearing exercise. So that helps. But I still think we need to do a few more things, because as we use resistance and we use weight to help our muscles and bones, we also help with our balance too. And as we incorporate all those things together, then we're less likely as we age to have osteoporosis or the starting of that. Of course, there's other things we need to do, but if we don't use resistance, we're not going to establish or prevent that. And I think it's overlooked many, many times. I know there are some, because we work with them, but I know there are many prescribers out there in the healthcare world that do not use this as a way of treating bones. And it is super important and easy to do. And we're not talking, deadlifting 500 pounds. We're just using your own weight and low weights, especially in women, and even men. Let's not forget men, that have significant results. And, it is a time thing, of course, but our bones are not like a rock. They're dynamic. We're an organism. So we need to use them to maintain them. So to me, it makes more sense to use actually the physics to actually stimulate that growth. And, we can just do with our own weight and our own resistance.
Well, and Janet did mention that, our bone structure is mostly built in our 20s and 30s.
Yep.
Now, that doesn't mean that it's downhill from there.
No, it does not have to be.
And it does not mean that with your muscle mass either. I have more lean body mass than I've ever had in my life. And it wasn't like, and I was a competitive athlete in high school in my younger years and a power lifter. So it wasn't like I wasn't lifting then, but with proper nutrition and proper resistance training, you can maintain lean body mass well into your upper age. Now, eventually age does catch up with us, but that's all just a number.
Right.
The longer we work out and the more we lift, the longer we will be able to keep that muscle mass. Now, Janet mentioned about using light weights and body weight, and I'm a big believer in that. Most of mine and Janet's exercises are just that. They are body weight exercises, which with some weight. Maybe a 30-pound dumbbell, maybe a 30-pound kettlebell is usually the heaviest we go. If we do some sumo squats or deadlift, we might use quite a bit more weight. But we don't, very rarely do we use barbells and throw a bunch of plates on. We do have that in our home gym, but we typically use dumbbells and kettlebells because it's enough weight. Now, when Janet did say body weight and lightweight, that doesn't mean you can't lift heavy, and that doesn't mean it's bad to lift heavy.
No.
And that doesn't mean it's bad to lift heavy for women either. In fact, probably in general, the heavier you go, probably the better, as long as you do it safely.
Right.
And especially if you have a coach to coach you doing that. Now, how does this relate to our everyday lives? Janet can share stories of people that have thrown their back out opening the refrigerator. Now, refrigerator door is heavy. I mean, it is on hinges. If you think about how heavy it is pretty heavy. It is on hinges. But if somebody was throwing around weights most of the time, they probably wouldn't have thrown their back out opening the refrigerator door. Or how many times do you hear of somebody picking something up off the ground, whether it be a sack of groceries out of their car, and they pull their back? If you're regularly doing resistance training, that's probably it's going to be less likely to happen because your muscles are already used to be stimulated doing that. I got to share a story here, and then I'll let you go. Jan and I were eating late lunch yesterday, and there was a yoke for oxen hanging up on the wall at this restaurant. And Janet looked up at it and says, and solid wood.
With metal.
Yep. And Janet looked up at it and says, can you imagine have to do that? Put animals in that every day and multiple times a day? And I thought about that. And I thought that thing probably weighed, well over 50 pounds, maybe closer to 100. I don't know. But, decades ago, that's what we did as humans in our day-to-day lives. We lifted heavy things. So we are just trying to stimulate what we did generations ago to keep us from losing our muscle mass. Go ahead, Jan.
Right. And I think that's the key thing is the stimulation, because as we age, the problems that set in, and it's not just osteoporosis, it's things like, for example, dementia. It's things like heart disease. We could go down the list. If we're not stimulating the body, then the body doesn't repair. And that's actually what happens when we exercise, is that we tear down our tissue and then we rebuild it. And so it's a dynamic process. And like Shawn said, we need to have adequate nutrition and sleep and rest. But the benefits go beyond that, I think. When I'm talking about dementia and wellness and health, mental health and all that, there's so many different neurotransmitters. There's so many different things that happen in our body that are really hard to go down that list and make it easy for people to understand. But it's that dynamic thing that happens to us as we are active. And, we don't we don't, as far as the time in our gym, we're not there hours and hours. We're 20 minutes, 15 minutes, 30 minutes. So it's not a huge amount of time. I mean, I'm not knocking people who want to do more time. I'm just saying that it's achievable with our lifestyles to do some of these exercises. And it doesn't have to be like you reinvent the wheel. I mean, there's so many programs, there's so many YouTubes out there, there's so many people that teach classes. I mean, we have a client that teaches 6 aerobic classes a day. And so, my point is there's so many different avenues to do this that, can make it more enjoyable and something that you like. But we need to do it because, just sitting on the couch or at our desk. I mean, for me, sitting at my desk day in and day out, you get aches and pains in places that you probably normally wouldn't just because of overuse. And when you start using your body and actually moving it, things just change. You feel better, your brain feels better, your outlook is better, your overall health is better.
And when she says that, you don't need a lot of time, probably 30 minutes, 3 to 4 times a week, if
Right.
if that's all you're doing. And if you're doing other exercises, you probably don't need that much. Jen and I usually spend less than 30 minutes a week, less than 30 minutes twice a week in the gym is what we do. Now we do ride our bikes often, but for our strength training, that's what we do. So if you're not doing other activity, then I would suggest that 30 minutes to 3 to 4 times a week is adequate, and you can get a lot done in a short amount of time. Especially if you're not trying to lift large amounts of weight and you're not trying to see how heavy you can lift, or how or be like a bodybuilder type where you need a lot of rest between sets. Then you can get 6 to 9 sets out in 30 minutes. And so that's very little rest. Typically, when Janet and I do our sets, we do push-pull exercises with upper body and lower body. So what is a push-pull? A push would be like lifting. So tricep, and a pull would be like pulling towards you. So in many ways you can do that. And that's more of a bicep movement, bicep and back. Triceps, obviously, shoulder also, and pectorials. Those are push-pulls for upper body. So do 2 sets of those. Do 2 sets of those, 2 different exercises of those, 2 sets each, 8 to 12 reps. And then push-pull, the same with the legs. So a push would be like a squat, just squat down and stand up. And a pull would be leaning over and pulling up with your legs, and that would be more like a deadlift. That's going to work your hamstrings and your glutes. 2 of those, and then some core exercises. So then 2 core exercises, and 1 with a twisting motion, so you can target your obliques. Those are really easy to do. You can Google those. There's all kinds of YouTube videos on different push-pull exercises for upper body, lower body. And those are 6 sets right there. Maybe add a few other things. Maybe add some 5 minutes of jump rope to get some cardio in there. Jump rope burns 10 calories a minute. So 5 minutes of jump rope, you burn 50 calories. And do that 3 or 4 times a week, and you are set. Now, you don't need fancy equipment either. Resistance bands, I've talked about them before on this podcast, are very, very good because they're very portable and they're easy to use. But you can also have bands that really have a lot of resistance, and ones that have lower resistance. So kettlebells, I like kettlebells because you can use them to like kettlebell swing is not only a resistance exercise, but it'll get your cardiovascular system going also, and your pulmonary, because it's going to get you breathing hard and your heart rate up. So you start doing kettlebell swings, and any lift really, actually, where you start doing a lot of weight will get your heart rate up, which is cardio essentially. Janet?
So if you're not somebody that's familiar to working out, I do suggest that you get some help. There's YouTube. There's also many gyms that are open with trainers. I know in our local area, we have women that do a lot of jazzercise, and they do incorporate things into that. But don't just not do something because you're not comfortable. I mean, you can still get, great instruction in your own home just by YouTubing. And many times, if we don't understand something that Shawn's coach has prescribed, we Google it and we watch somebody that does the form correctly before we start the process. And, that's fun because you get to learn something new. But the whole idea is that we do something that is safe for ourselves, that we have outcome that actually is better than taking a pharmaceutical. And that's kind of our goal, is that there's a natural approach that we have in our own biological systems, that we can maintain healthy tissue if we use it. And if you don't use it, the old term, you lose it. And I agree that that happens. And sedentary lifestyles is part of a first world problem. I understand that, but it doesn't mean it has to be. So there are so many different options out there, whether maybe you don't like kettlebells. Well, there's dumbbells. Maybe if you don't want to even buy that, you have canned food. I mean, there's so many different options that you can do. You can use your own body for resistance. I see many times on just fast little blips on exercise that women will just use their own body for resistance, like a push up, and you can do a sit up. I mean, you don't have to buy equipment.
Or body weight squats.
Yeah, right. You don't even have to add a lot to it. Just keep moving.
And when Janet mentioned canned food, you can literally use canned food for weights. I mean, just put them in your arms and start moving it. There's little things. I've been in gyms before, hotel gyms, and they didn't have hardly any weights whatsoever. So, but they did have a water bottle coolers they were storing in there. So I just grabbed that water bottle cooler and started doing squats with it and deadlifts with it. Why not? And we think about it, that's why we do it anyway, is to help us with our everyday lives, so we don't get injured and can get through our day better without injury.
Or if you do injure, the advantage of moving and having that in your lifestyle is that you do heal quicker and better because your body's used to that process. This is so true of, like, you'll see kids that were very active growing up in sports, and then they become adults and they have to, like, revisit healthy lifestyles, and they swing back into being an athlete much easier, or into healthier lifestyles faster than somebody that's never done any activity. So there's something to be said about, muscle memory and body memory. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't have to go, we still want you to do something, even if you haven't been active. But my point is our body's so smart that it remembers, and it also helps when we're healing. So that healing process, if you get injured or hurt, it's faster recovery. And so not moving even after an injury sometimes makes it worse. I mean, it depends on what the injury is, but stagnant tissue doesn't necessarily heal as fast as it should.
And you need to listen to your body when it comes
to
to injury. But yeah, movement is a lot of times good. That's what physical therapy literally is.
Right.
One thing I wanted to mention is about how you can prevent injury because you have more muscle mass.
Sure.
I've wrecked on a bike many, many times, and it's going to continue to happen. And I know there's times where that if I didn't have enough upper body muscle mass, I would have been way more injured than I would have if I didn't have that body mass. Whether it be broken shoulders, whether it be broken ribs, whether it be broken neck. I got into a pretty good wreck a few weeks ago, and I hit my head pretty hard, and it hurt my neck. And I got to think that if I didn't have developed trapezius, how much more injury I could have had. And I see, frail people that don't have a lot of muscle mass that will wreck on their bike, and they break all kinds of bones, and it didn't even look that bad. And I wonder if they had a more robust strength training program and had a bigger upper body, if they would have not had that injury. Now, obviously, they try to have as little upper body mass as possible. Some of the competitive cyclists, like especially the road cyclists, because upper body mass doesn't make you go fast on the bike, but it does help you help your health in general long term. So unless you're competing in the Tour de France, if you're a cyclist or endurance athlete, strength training is super important, and that means upper body mass.
Right. And I think something has to be said about equilibrium and balance, because that's something that as we age that we lose if we don't use it and force our body to compensate. It's a natural thing that happens to all of us. And the older we get, the more that balance issue becomes super important. And that's why, strength can be super helpful too, because if you're strengthening your bones, if your bones are stronger and your muscles and your joints are stronger, then you can adjust. And I think there's something in our brain too, that when we're doing motion and we keep doing it between our eyes and brain and our body, it saves us some consequences, I think, as time goes on with activities, because we force ourselves to that, visual awareness as well as our physical awareness. And if you stop doing that, you lose it.
Absolutely. And speaking of balance, when you're doing a lot of exercises, strength type resistance training, it requires balance. I mean, if
Right.
you're doing a squat with weight, or deadlift, it requires balance. And take some weight away, less weight, or even body weight, and do one-legged squats, do one-legged deadlifts. There was a study that was published a few years ago. Now, I'm not a big fan of studies necessarily, but I get where this is coming at, and hopefully you'll understand the analogy I'm using. That if a person can't stand on one leg, their chances of dying within the next 10 years is very, very great. Now let's think about that. Um, think about somebody that's elderly and frail. They walk with a walker. They're in a wheelchair. Well, I mean, the chances are they're probably not going to live another 10 years. Now, there's exceptions to that rule for sure, but they're obviously not in super good health. So the more you can do those things, the longer you're going to live, statistically speaking. Another thing is with your eyesight, proprioception. It helps you when you start balancing yourself. It helps you, realize where your body is in space and time. So if you do some winter, you're going to fall on the ice. If you have been doing resistance training and balance type exercises, then that next time you fall or about to fall on the ice, you might know how to catch yourself better, without getting injured, or at least preventing more severe injury. So, or not fall at all, because you have better balance and proprioception, because you're just used to moving your body, with extra weight even. So that so many benefits of strength training and resistance training, and it doesn't have to be complicated. Just like we just stated here, it doesn't have to be complicated. You don't have to have fancy equipment. You can travel with exercise bands. Pretty much any gym. I mean, I'm sorry. Almost every hotel has some sort of gym, and usually there's um, some kind of weight there, as far as dumbbells or sometimes kettlebells. And even if not that, they have some kind of universal gym, with cable weights or something that you can pull around, and it just doesn't need to be fancy. And if you don't have that, just bring your exercise bands, travel with them. I travel with them in my suitcase. Do it from your room. You don't need a lot of room. You don't need a lot of space, and you can knock out a good workout in 15 minutes. So I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Stay tuned for our regularly scheduled podcast, which I think this week, let me just check. I think it's actually Wednesday. I believe it is. It is Wednesday, and who is our guest? We have Dr. Jerry Williams on. He has been very outspoken during and treated thousands of patients during. He has urgent care clinics all over the nation, and he's going to be sharing his story. He actually just testified in front of Congress, I believe, last week or the week before. So you don't want to miss out on him. 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Wednesday, our regularly scheduled midweek podcast. So thank you, listeners and viewers. If you want any videos from about working out, strength training, including exercise bands, go to our YouTube site, the Moses Lake Professional Pharmacy YouTube site. There are playlists in there of workouts with Shawn and different strength training exercises. If you have any questions, as always, comment comment on our Facebook page. We also stream live on LinkedIn and Twitter. And if you have any questions, please comment. Please reach out on those platforms, and we can answer your questions. So, as always, thank you, listeners, viewers, to listening to Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham. We will see you Wednesday. Thank you so much for listening.